Hello, everyone. It's been a minute since we've done one of these streams. Welcome to Digital Hammurabi. I am your host, Megan Lewis. The dapper-looking gentleman in the jacket is Dr. Joshua Bowen, and we are going to be talking about slavery in the Old Testament.
What?
Because I know, it's shocking, absolutely shocking. Maybe shocking for people who haven't ever been on the internet. This is, I feel, all that you have done for the past couple of years, because we have this beautiful thing, which is, like, I swear, big enough to at least concuss a badger. It might not kill one, but we're into concussion territory here. That is the second volume, not the second volume, the second edition, of Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? Revised and greatly expanded and updated. For comparison, this was volume 1. And to be fair, this was a pretty thorough treatment of the topic. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much extra work Dr. Bowen has been putting into this particular publication for the past year, 2. How long have you been working on this one, Josh?
Just enough for you to consider divorcing me, I think.
There is never a time that will happen. But yeah, it's been a year or two, I think. So we're going to talk about slavery in the Old Testament. We are going to try and encourage people, if they have not picked up a copy, to go. The link is in the description, at least for the Kindle pre-order. Kindle will be downloadable tomorrow.
It should be automatically, I think, sent out.
If you pre-order, it should be automatically sent to whatever device you read the Kindle on.
But we did get some pictures on Twitter today that people have received their physical copies.
Hooray!
Which is pretty cool. Yeah, so that's cool. So you can go get the paperbacks available right now.
And we're working on a hardcover. We weren't going to, because the printing costs are considerably higher, and no one's going to pay that much money for a book about slavery. And then we've had several people say they would in fact pay that much money, and please could we give them a hard copy. So we're working on that. Hopefully by the end of the weekend that will be available also. So if you prefer hardback books, there will be one coming.
Now I want everybody to hit, like, Megan was the one that set that deadline. I just want to put that out there. That wasn't me in response to someone. So Josh, when's the next volume going to come out?
Oh, it's just because I can't have it hanging over me for another week. Need it out and done so I can
noted
move
on to that other book that you wrote.
Yeah, I was going to say that other book that we need to get put out. But anyway, hello everybody. If you have questions for Josh or I on any topic, but slavery, if we're sticking to today's subject, please put them in the chat of whatever platform you're watching on, and we will get around to those as and when we can.
And Josh, I apologize for the no bow tie. I see Kip pointing it out. Thanks, Kip. It's been a bit of a week. This was we made it in here on time though. So
we didn't, because actually I think I set the stream to start at 7:45 rather than 8. Oh. So we were we tried. We thought we were starting at 8. So as far as we were concerned, we were in fact early. But I think we were the only people who thought that we were early. We have a question. Can we please get access to signed paperbacks? Yes. We're going to start doing signed copies through the Etsy store, which is Kinnair Formations. And as soon as we have the hard copy, like the price set, and I can order some so that we can send you signed copies, they will be in the Etsy store. I will put the link in the description for those who are interested and watching later. Josh, given that it's been a little bit since actually I had you on the channel, why don't you give an introduction for people who are unfamiliar with you? Who are you? Where do you come from? What do you do? And how on earth did you get into this particular field of study?
Yeah, that's a good set of questions. So I am Dr. Josh. I grew up an evangelical Christian. I think I ended up being an evangelical fundamentalist for about 25, 26 years, and um, got a bachelor's degree in religion from a very conservative school. Then I went and got a master's in theology from also a very conservative school. And then I somehow got into Johns Hopkins University, where I
I think the
deconverted.
4.2 GPA probably had something to do with that. It wasn't like
Well,
random chance.
I had time. I had time to kill. That's why I could get those kinds of grades. But yeah, so I got my PhD from Johns Hopkins in Assyriology with a minor in Hebrew Bible. And sorry, I just turned my phone on by saying that. And yeah, I deconverted, so became an atheist while I was there, then sort of became an agnostic because it didn't really matter anymore. And then once I graduated, uh, we found ourselves on social media on our YouTube channel here. And uh, I quickly found that there was a need, sometimes a pressing need, for good biblical scholarship. And because I had the research skills to sort of bring the experts to people and like bring them good biblical scholarship, because I know how to go find it. That's what I ended up doing. So yeah, I do a lot of stuff that's like would be considered counter apologetics. I don't have any problem with like religion or anything per se. Like I'm in favor of good people. It's just when people take very narrow interpretive approaches to the text and then say, and now you have to take that same interpretive approach, or that's when I start to have a problem.
Thank you very much. Why and how did you get into specifically slavery? And why do you keep talking about it? Which is a question we do get asked occasionally.
Every day, I feel like, for me. So yeah, there was a video that came out 2018ish, maybe 2019, something like that, and it was by a Christian apologist by the name of Alan Parr. And Alan Parr is he was, even at the time, even more so now, very, very popular Christian apologist on YouTube, and he put out this video on slavery. And of course, it was sort of the stereotypical standard defenses of slavery in the Bible. And so um, another big YouTube name, Alex O'Connor, Cosmic Skeptic, did a couple of response videos, I think, to Alan Parr, to which at the time, smaller, but now quite popular YouTuber by the name of What Do You Meme put out his own responses to Alex O'Connor's response to Alan Parr. And, I just thought it was in very poor taste because I thought that Alex made some good points. And while I didn't agree with everything that he said, I agreed with most of what he said. And I thought that John McCrae, What Do You Mean, just didn't really understand the topic well enough. And because he was fairly popular at the time, not as super popular as he is now, I thought this should probably be addressed. And so I did my own series of videos. I think I did 3 at first, and then it sort of took off. Everybody wanted to talk about it. And yeah, so after, of course, when I do research for videos, they tend to be, well, like you do them, and like Bart Ehrman does them. Like when we do videos, we do lots and lots of research and no stone left unturned. And so I had these fairly lengthy scripts, and then I've got a whole binder somewhere. It's just a big 3-inch 3-ring binder that's just overflowing with notes, printouts. And then I discovered this thing called a computer. No, I'm just kidding. But and so I had all this data, and I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put a resource together, not too big, just something that's got a really good bibliography that really cites a lot of scholars. That anybody that's interested in debating the topic of slavery, the thought was generally online because that's normally where I encounter it, but also just around the dining room table, at maybe at like Thanksgiving or something. And you end up talking about slavery. What are the key things that you should know about slavery in the Hebrew Bible, in particular in the Old Testament? And so I put that book together. Shut me up, by the way, if you need me to stop talking. And uh, it seemed like it was used by a fair number of people. And the thing is, it was also used by a great number of Christian apologists online. And one of the one of the dangers of putting out consensus scholarship, like research on a particular topic, and citing a whole bunch of scholars in the field, is that now everybody knows where to find all this data, right? Which is great, but can be terrible. So in this case, um, I started noticing pretty quickly that uh, a lot of people in the apologetics world were like citing scholars that they hadn't cited before. And I was like, how do you know about Klaus Wilke and his work on the early dynastic period of Mesopotamia? How do you know about that? Oh, it's in my book. Okay,
Because they
that's
read
why.
your book and
That
just took the bibliography. But
so
then, fascinatingly, didn't actually read in full the articles and the chapters and the books that you cite. They just kind of cherry picked the bits that they thought they could use to argue against you.
yeah, it does sort of seem that way. Um, so sorry, I just saw a question in the chat. I was going to try to fix this, but I don't. Oh wait, yes, I do know how. They asked what my full name is. So it is
Josh, honey. Josh.
what
Josh. I'm
what
hosting, my love.
what?
I you don't need to worry about the chat. I will.
Oh, sorry, I just
No,
saw.
I don't want you to get worried about answering questions and stuff. I promise I will. I'll bring them up if we need to.
Sorry.
No, I know that you get a little
Sorry. That's my name.
concerned.
Okay. Sorry. Uh, yes, and now the proof, as I've lost what I was saying. So no, I remember. Okay, so they're bringing out these new things, and the problem, as you say, is like they don't know exactly what they're reading, and so for example, if you cite a book, cite what somebody says that's an Assyriologist that he's working with Sumerian texts from the third millennium, and he says, here's this thing about slavery from the city of Uruk or from the city of Umma or something. You can't then just like straight extrapolate that out to to Israel in the first millennium. Like it doesn't work that way. But the thing is, I don't even think that they realized that that's what the book was about, right? They just saw the word slavery. They saw that I had cited the book, and so they just start quoting this stuff. Look, Vilka says this, and the big one was Raymond Westbrook, right? Who's an ancient Near Eastern legal specialist, and Westbrook says this, and Westbrook says that, and it's actually not Westbrook. It's actually like Freimer Kensky, and her part of the book where she writes about Israel. But anyway, the point is that all this misinformation started going out, even from using my work on the topic. So, I spent seems like a million years, but definitely two, um, doing shows and talking to people and like trying to deal with issues that were coming up from just stuff that was in my book. And I decided that so many new arguments, so many new bad arguments were thrown out that people had to deal with, not the least of whom were me. That I thought, all right, I'm gonna write a second edition of this thing, and I'm just gonna put it on steroids and I'm not going to do like the what do you need to know to get by. This is going to be like the one stop shop. If you want to talk about slavery in the Bible, specifically in the Old Testament, but I also go into the New Testament a little bit, but primarily in the Old Testament, like this is the book you want. So yeah, that's why it's that big.
It is indeed on steroids. I think that's an excellent way to describe it. So well done. And it's, as someone who has copy edited and read through both versions, yeah, there's a lot of information in there. And it is actually a really good resource if you are interested in doing more research yourself, because this one has like all of the quotes of the other people who have worked on this before, but also in the appendices, we have Josh's own translations of like all of the laws of Hammurabi that deal with slavery, and all of the other ancient Near Eastern law codes that deal with slavery, and all of the Hebrew laws that deal with slavery, and like laws on battery. Like they are all translated and there's a small commentary, so you can kind of understand or get Josh's interpretation of what that law is actually doing. So
And to be clear, just a little uh,
yeah,
nuance there. So all of the Hebrew translations are mine, all the Hebrew laws, but because uh, I, I I wanted everybody to feel very confident in the translations that they were reading back there. So obviously, like I'm an Assyriologist, so I can translate Sumerian and Akkadian, but because they're from so many different periods and so many different regions, maybe not necessarily there are different regions, but um, people that work in these particular groups of texts specialize in them. And so I thought it best to use their translations for these, the different law collections. So, like Martha Roth, um, Miguel Seville, obviously, like in the Old Assyrian period, Klaus Veinhoff, like the people that work in these texts. I use their translations, but then I provide my own commentary and I cite the hell um, out of their work to so that it's not just me saying this. Um,
someone else is actually
right?
like other people agree with you,
Yeah,
strangely.
weird. And that's the
So
that's sorry. That's the
no,
biggest thing though is that like this what I'm doing is I'm saying I am the liaison, right? I I I know who the scholars are. I know who's reputable. I know what all the books are. I've read them all. Look, here's what they say about this topic. Okay. Like here, every law on slavery from the ancient Near East is in this book in translation. Okay. And then a whole host of like legal contracts, administrative texts, letters, literary texts, proverbs. Like there's a whole bunch of extra stuff thrown in there, all that deal with slavery, commentary with each one, amongst other things that I deal with. So yeah, it really is meant to be that sort of
well,
last.
I was going to
Yeah.
say concise resource. I wouldn't say concise, but a
Okay.
useful resource for people interested. We have a super chat and a question. Thank you so much, Mitchell. Do you think slaves under the Bible's rules were better or worse off compared to treatment by other religions and cultures of the time? And
Like,
that's something we see semi-regularly, actually,
mm,
people saying, oh, the Bible it represents this great ethical, moral step forward. It's not as bad as the laws of Hammurabi, or slaves are treated so much more humanely than in other Near Eastern cultures. So, yes, it's an interesting one.
yeah. And honestly, this is probably a good segue into some of the main apologetic arguments if you wanted to talk about any of those. But like, yeah, this is a big one, right? People that's what they say because one of the ways that apologists come at this is they'll say, well, okay, sure, it's slavery, but I mean, let's just get this out of the way right now. It's nothing like the slavery from the wicked cultures that were all around them in the ancient Near East. It's not really how that works. And that's actually probably the biggest new part of the book is comparative analysis. That's what I'm trying to do. So not only do I like, there's a reason I want the reader to have access to all of these slave laws from the ancient Near East, because I want them to be able to say, all right, for example, um, the law about debt service, the length of debt service that you find in Exodus 21, 20 to 21, or 2 to 6, and in Deuteronomy 15, 12 to 18. Like, how does that compare to what we see in the wider ancient Near East? And this is just a simple example. Um, in the Hebrew Bible, it says somebody goes into your debt service, somebody becomes a debt slave to you, they serve for 6 years, and then they go free in the seventh. And the rationale behind this is like a debt slave, if there weren't things put in place, like if I became your debt slave, Megan, because I owed you 10 shekels of silver, you might say, okay, each year that you work for me, you're going to work like that's going to be worth like 3 shekels of silver. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's not too bad. Yeah, I served like a little over 3 years and I'm out. But then you say, now, room and board is going to be 2 shekels of silver per year. And of course, I'm going to like do this. There's going to be interest on your loan, and that's going to be 1.50 shekels. Well, okay, so I'm getting 3 shekels of silver a year, but you're charging me 3.5 shekels a year. So I'm actually going further into debt the more I work for you, right? And so, in order to, in order to mitigate and keep that sort of thing from sort of being the standard, being the norm, laws were put in place that said, okay, they're going to serve for X amount of time as a debt slave. After that period, everything's paid off. So the principal, any interest, any room and board, whatever it is you think you're going to throw at them, whatever this amount of time is, it's done. It's over. So in the Old Testament laws, in these two passages, it says that the Israelite is to serve for 6 years. In the seventh year, they're set free, debts repaid, right? When you go to the laws of Hammurabi, that period of time that they serve and it's paid off is 3 years. So, I mean, like this is sort of the danger of doing this kind of comparative analysis, and I talk about this in the book, is you got to be really careful when you do it because there are places in these laws that you could say, yeah, okay, so the Old Testament seems like it's a little bit better here. This is great. Sometimes it's like, oh, actually, the Old Testament's not quite as progressive as what we see back here in the laws of Hammurabi. Oh, like, what do we do? So it's very, you have to be very careful about your methodology when you do something like that. But on the whole, to finally answer the question, they're about the same, right? It's an ancient Near Eastern text. Sorry.
Are there any substantial differences between how slaves are treated in these cultures, or is it broadly comparable and the differences are just kind of nuance?
The only thing that is substantial, I think, and this is not between cultures necessarily, but the only thing that is substantial that I can think of off the top of my head here is this the way the laws oh, sorry, a little thing just popped up and I disappeared. Are the laws in Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus 25, which say things like when you set a debt slave free after those 6 years, you can't just send him out free. You have to actually give him all kinds of stuff from your vineyard, from your field. You have to like provide him liberally so that he can go out and start afresh, right? And then in Leviticus 25, you have a similar sort of concept where you're not allowed to keep Israelites as slaves anymore, even debt slaves. But you have to keep them as hired workers. You have to release them every 50th year, and they all go back to their land. Anyway, there are these sort of major steps that, in some ways, are nuanced, right? And certainly the Deuteronomy 15 one seems like a pretty big difference, right? But the problem is that you can't just see that and say, "Oh my gosh, Old Testament's banging, right? That's awesome." Do you like that? I don't know what it
That
means.
is that. I'm just gonna clip that short. The Old Testament is banging.
It's
You
banging.
heard it from Dr. Josh.
I don't know
Uh,
what that means exactly.
we'll ask a young person. They'll tell
Yes,
us.
a young person. Um, we are young persons. That's I'm gonna keep telling myself that. Anyhow, um, the problem is that in Deuteronomy 15 and Leviticus 25, these are very utopian passages, right? So uh, the fact is that scholars would agree these things were most likely in no way ever implemented, um, and it's pretty apparent in the text itself why. So when you read it, like there is this impression that you get just from reading the text that the people are like scratching their heads, going, "How are we going to do that?" Right? Like if they're my debt slave because they owed me money and they became my debt slave and worked off that debt, then when they leave, you want me to give them a bunch of stuff, which sort of nullifies in a lot of ways what they just did. How's that going to work economically? And the text anticipates that and says, "Hey, I'm going to bless you supernaturally so you can do this." Right. And so outside of passages like that, there's really not a lot that is substantially different. Again, sort of on the whole.
So I wanted to kind of touch on something that, again, is I listen to Josh like argue with people online, and I watch him argue with people on Twitter and YouTube, and so I get I don't participate in these arguments because I don't have the patience for stupidity that he does. Um, so I just listen to his side of what's going on. So I get a feel for what topics come up regularly. And one of the things that I do hear a lot of is the difference between like debt slaves and chattel slaves. And oh, the Bible doesn't have chattel slaves. It's not people being owned as property, it's just people working off their debts. It's like owning a credit card or being a member of a professional sports team. You can't just like up and leave. You have to work for a person because you're contracted to, blah, 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 blah. So I wanted to ask what the difference is between debt servitude or indentured slavery and chattel slavery, and how the biblical texts in the ancient Near East, like general law collections, treat them differently, and whether they do actually treat those two groups of people differently.
Yeah, and that does come up a lot. Um, so there are three broad categories of slavery. Different scholars can nuance that a little bit, um, but generally speaking, what you see is debt slavery, or famine slavery sort of falls underneath that category in my mind, because you've run out of money, you've run out of resources, and you're having to like sell yourself. Uh, so it's not necessarily you took on a debt to someone, but you know, anyway. So you can see how I kind of put those things together. Um, but you have broadly debt slavery, which encompasses several different types of debt slavery. Uh, and basically that slavery is it's very often contractual, or it's just dependent upon the repayment of the debt, right? That's most often what happens. It's just once the debt is repaid, you're out. It can be repaid by you, it can be repaid by somebody else, you can work it off, whatever. um Chattel slavery is basically slavery owner, somebody owning another person as property, just like in debt slavery. It's just the slavery is not contingent upon the repayment of the debt. So I'll give you an example. If someone is born to a slave, um, to two slaves, as we see in Exodus 21, 2-6, that child is a chattel slave. Their slavery is not contingent upon some debt that they owe, right? Because they're a kid, right? They're a baby. Um, and so that they're just the master's property. There is no required manumission for that slave. So yeah, debt slavery is slavery that's contingent upon a debt. Chattel slavery, it's just not. They're generally kept for life, passed on as inheritance, those sorts of things. Um, Broadly speaking, probably the day to day life of these two types of slaves would be very similar. Obviously, during the period of servitude, slavery, whatever, for even for the debt slave, like they've lost their personal freedom, right? They can't just like leave. It doesn't work that way. And they can't wake up on a Wednesday morning and be like, this was fun. I'm out. Um, you know, so those are the sort of the two main types. Now, it does seem like, and the Hebrew Bible doesn't get into a lot of the specifics here, so we sort of have to piece this together a little bit, and this sort of thing still gets debated. So this is one of the areas that I don't go into a lot in the book, primarily because it is still sort of up in the air, and that's not really the point of the book, to get down into those type of smaller debated topics. But when we look at the broader ancient Near Eastern law collections, it does seem like uh, debt slaves were treated better, and I think we see hints of this, sometimes stronger hints, um, in the Hebrew Bible. But certainly, a debt slave is considered someone that, in theory, would ultimately be a free person again, right? Um, like, because they had this expected manumission, because the debt would eventually be paid off in
I
theory.
want to, sorry, before you carry on, I want to ask, is it possible for a debt slave to become a chattel slave?
Yeah, absolutely. In several different ways. So, uh, someone, let's say, could be given as a pledge. So somebody that, and there are lots, there are different pledges. But let's say I take out a loan from you, you're my creditor, and I have my own slave, or it doesn't even have to be a slave. Let's say I take my daughter or my son or my wife, and I say, okay, I'm going to place them in your house as your debt slave, a slave that whose slavery is contingent upon this debt. Um, when I take out this loan, sort of as a type of collateral, I could set it up. We could agree that this person was going to, my son was going to work for you, and that was going to take care of any interest that would accrue on the loan. Anyway, um, now if I don't pay off that debt in time, the contract can stipulate, the law can allow, like we can make agreements, whatever, that at a certain point, that 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 son of mine, who was to that point considered a debt slave that would ultimately be set free again, you can take them for their full value, and they become a chattel slave. So, and what that does is, this is going to sound terrible, but here we are. If my loan from you was for 20 shekels of silver, and it was determined that the value of the pledge was 10 shekels of silver, you could, depending on the circumstance, they could convert from their pledge debt slave, sort of status, into a full chattel slave. And now my loan would only be 10 shekels of silver, but you would now have a chattel slave. So that was one way. Of course, we see another way in Exodus 21, 2-6, where a free person sells themselves into debt slavery, but is given a wife by the master who is a chattel slave, and they have children. Well, the wife and the children belong to the master as chattel slaves. And after the 6 years, the husband can say, it's been real, but I'm out. But if he says, I love my wife, I love my children, I love my master, he can voluntarily sign up for chattel slavery, lifelong service slavery. And so that conversion can take place. So there are other ways that this can happen. But yeah, those are some of the ways.
So to return just to looking at the texts that you've been working with, in the book and just generally. What are the law collections, and can we use them to actually understand a person's lived experience?
The $64,000 question, right? Um, so yeah, let's set up the problem a little bit because that is a phenomenal question, and I can see why you're so good at being. In case anybody doesn't know, this is Bart Ehrman's host for his podcast, and you can see why she's just good at this. Anyway, um,
I've had some
so
practice.
yeah, indeed, especially in the past week. Um, so uh, we have, of course, if you read through your Bible, you read through Exodus or Deuteronomy or Leviticus, you'll see these long stretches uh, where it says like what just look like laws, right? If a man does X, then this will happen to that man, and this sort of if then type of construction is very very common, both in the Hebrew Bible and in the ancient Near East, and we have surviving copies, sometimes many surviving copies of different sets, sometimes very long sets of these types of if then laws. The most famous is probably the laws of Hammurabi. It was originally called like a law code. That's sort of fallen out of favor. I don't have to talk about why, but and basically it's just the laws of Hammurabi are like 282 laws. If then, if then, if then, if then. And so we have them from, you know, the third millennium, really right on down into the Neo-Babylonian period. So, mid first millennium BCE. And they there's some variation among them. Some of the earlier ones seem to have more commonalities between them than the later ones, but whatever. Uh, so w- the question was, what are they? Now, early on, scholars saw these things and said, "Oh my gosh, look, it's if an ox gores a free person, then this will be the punishment for the owner of the ox." Okay, well, I mean, pretty straightforward. I guess what these things were was like you'd have a judge sort of sitting there, right? And you have people come up and present their case. Hey, this is Frank. Frank was told last week that his ox had been trying to gore people and he didn't keep him, penned up. And he went out and gored my slave to death, right? And, what are you going to do about it? The judge says, all right, hang on a second. So, laws of Hammurabi. Okay, if an ox scores a slave. Okay. So here in the law of Hammurabi, it says that you're supposed to pay X amount of shekels. Okay, so bang the gavel, like that's the judgment, right? Go, be warm, be filled. um, so and that made sense. This was they considered this to be like an authoritative type of law. It was the normative law of the land. Hammurabi like promulgated this out. Here are the rules, everybody. And then you had the state would enforce that set of rules, right? Um, there are problems with that. We don't have to talk about them here. I talk about them in the book. Um, the arguments can get a little complicated, but it didn't seem like that was the right way to view these things because there were problems that showed up. And so scholars began to think, well, maybe this is different. Maybe these are like more like wisdom, it's a type of wisdom literature, right? And they're not actually laws that were on the books, but they sort of reflect the way that good living would be carried out in the eyes of the gods and in the eyes of the king, and so maybe it's not really like something that's enforced by the governing authority, but it was like this is the right way to do things. Other scholars said, no, these are scribal exercises, right? Because they fit the pattern of scribal exercises. And actually, they had nothing to do with legal practice at the time. These are just ways scribes are learning to do stuff. other scholars said, okay, yeah, they are in the form of scribal exercise, and they clearly were copied out by scribes, but that doesn't mean that they didn't actually reflect um, the way law was practiced in the same way that you have model contracts and model letters, that are that show up in the scribal curriculum as well, but they reflect which makes sense. They reflect the way that people wrote letters and people made contracts because that's what scribes are going to do. So no, they actually do inform, um, how law was done. I'll shut up in a second. Like other people thought, well, maybe they're not actually uh, laws that were actually authoritative, but the person that wrote them thought they should be authoritative. And the example that I give in the book, and it's just funny, so I'll give it here, is our daughter Piper um, is very, very creative. And I came downstairs one day, and she had created this list of house rules for us, right? And she had drawn a little map with all the different rooms on it and labeled all the different rooms. And like, this was my room, and this was Uncle Floor's room, who doesn't even live in the States, like, and there were all these ways that people were supposed to behave. Now, in her mind, this was it, right? This is how this should be done. But if somebody were to come along and pick up this list, would they be able to say these were the house rules? This was actually carried out and enforced? No, of course not. But so there are lots of different ways to think about this. Okay, why does any of this matter? Right? There is an apologetic argument, and again, I won't, spoilers. I won't develop it here. But there's an apologetic argument that again comes from people reading the bibliography in my book and coming up with ideas. Anyway, um, where and that's not strictly true. It's a little hyperbolic there, but it certainly didn't help. and they say, well, now wait, if all these ancient Near Eastern scholars are saying stuff like, well, maybe these aren't actually laws that were authoritative and enforced. Well, they argue about the biblical laws too, because the biblical laws are also ancient Near Eastern laws. Well, wait a minute. Maybe these laws that weren't actually from God. And maybe then you can't say, how could God command or endorse slavery? Because the laws weren't even from him. Look, don't you know anything about ancient Near Eastern scholars? Well, there's a pretty big problem with that argument. I'll leave that for the books. You guys can go read it and see what the answer is. But I mean, that is the argument, right? If 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 the laws weren't normative legislation, if they weren't authoritative law that was supposed to be enforced by they were just sort of wisdom ideas, right? Well, then how can you ascribe any kind of fault or blame or whatever in the Bible to the God commanding something like slavery? You can't, because he's just, hey, this is man coming up with this stuff, right? Is sort of the idea. So what's the answer? Well, we've priced it right.
Read the book to find out.
Get yourself a copy. Yeah.
Beautiful. So we don't have a question from Germania, but we have a super chat. Thank you very much. And a suggestion that we all send Frank Turek copies of Did the Old Testament Endorse Slavery? I don't think that's a bad idea, to be honest. I don't think Mr. Turek would be thrilled.
I'm still not convinced that like his Twitter account is not a bot, right? Because I mean, like, it says the same stuff over and over again. But the thing about somebody like Germania is like he can't even philosophize the instantiated necessary preconditional notions of ultimacy for the ground of all being, for possible impossibilities of the possible.
Can you?
Obviously,
because I can't.
because my cup substantiates the instantiation. That's
very
just
nice
for
cup.
you, Gur.
So we are about 40 minutes in. We're not going to go for much longer because, frankly, I am tired and my brain kind of stops working about this time of the evening.
Well,
But I did.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
As a publisher with Digital Hammurabi Press, and given that this book, even though the paperback is available right now, there was sort of a glitch, and the Kindle version couldn't be released until tomorrow. It wouldn't let us. Is there any advantage to people going out and like getting like
I
pre-ordering
wish
the
you'd let me
Kindle?
just run this interview, sir. Honey, I'm teasing. I'm sorry.
Just gonna mute up now.
I'm teasing. Yes, so the Kindle pre-order is still available until tomorrow, and the advantage for us to people buying the pre-order, and we can't unfortunately do a paperback pre-order. Amazon doesn't give us the option. The benefit to a pre-order is that it kind of boosts the visibility of the book. It puts us up in the search algorithm. It boosts us in the like different genre rankings, different book category rankings. So if you are a Kindle person and you are feeling inclined to buy this, hit us up with a pre-order, because that just helps get the book out in front of more people. Of course, just buying it also will help boost search rankings and all of that good stuff. But before I let Josh go and before I let myself go, and go have a cup of tea and go to bed, I did want to ask, is there anything in the new book, the new volume edition, that's the word I'm searching for, the new edition, that you want to really highlight before we head out?
Yeah. So one of the things that someone might not expect to be in there, and I didn't anticipate doing it, but it just sort of worked out well. Is one of the one of the big sections, Exodus 21, that deals with slavery in the Old Testament, is there's this section that's couched in between verses 20 to 21 and 26 to 27, which are the two of the big sets of verses about debt slavery. Um, and it's this eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound section, lex talionis, right? And I remember having a debate. Debate's not the right word, but somebody said, "Debate me, bruh." Right, and so I said, "Okay." So I came in and tried to help, and they were having none of it. But the thing that they really wanted to push back on me about was this, big difference between the laws in the Old Testament about battery, you know, striking someone, wounding them, that sort of thing, and what you see in like the laws of Hammurabi and the other ancient Near Eastern law collections, and how the Bible is so much better, so much better. Um, and so I decided, because there are slave laws that engage with this in the ancient Near East and in the Hebrew Bible, I thought, well, I mean, I've already done like a bunch of the work. I have this huge Excel spreadsheet, huge, that is just, it's all the laws from all the law collections categorized out, right? Uh, the citation, like where it comes from, victim, um, crime, perpetrator, secondary victim. It's like all laid out, all of them. So I'd gone through them all, and I knew where all the battery laws were, and I worked on them. And anyway, so I just pulled them all into this Appendix B, and I did some work with them, and I organized them based on in a couple of different ways. One of them is, of course, I did comparative analysis, right? So all the laws where somebody gets struck and their eye gets knocked out. Just list them all out in chronological order. And then I have analysis, a section on analysis. What can we say about it? Then the next one, like somebody gets a tooth knocked out, somebody gets an ear cut off, like whatever. And so that was a really cool chapter or cool section of the appendix. But the other, the other one, um, the other one that I did that used the battery laws was to keep them within their individual collections. So all the laws about battery in the laws of Ornama, for example, from the third millennium, and I put them all in there and then ranked them by order of severity. And by severity, like generally looking at the penalty. So the most severe at the top, least severe at the bottom. The problem is that they're not all that straightforward. For example, if it were like if you knock out a tooth, it's 60 shekels of silver. If you knock out an eye, it's 40 shekels. If you cut off an ear, it's 30 shekels. Well, you could rank those pretty easily. But some of them are like, you know, if you get your eye knocked out, you get the other guy's eye gets knocked out, right? If you hit somebody in the cheek, you get beaten 30 lashes with this certain type of whip, you know? And so it's like, wait a minute, how do these relate to one another, right? Getting your mouth rubbed with salt. Where's that in severity? Is that 5 shekels? Is that less than 5 shekels? Like, what is that? So I
We
did
have to
a
do
lot.
experimental archaeology and test it out.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'll pay 5 shekels not to have that done to me, but not six, not six. But yeah, so the analysis section of each of those is, I don't know, it's pretty cool. What I feel like what I was able to do to sort of rank those relatively. So anyway, that's a pretty cool section that I think will be unexpected for the reader, but hopefully really useful ultimately.
Thank you very much,
Of
my
course,
love.
thank
We do
you.
have another super chat. Heng Fashi says, I definitely have some questions, but first I want to say how thankful I am that you guys started this channel. Digital Hammurabi is seriously eye-opening, and this channel has led to many others that I have learned so much from. Thank you very
Thank
much for
you.
both the super chat and the lovely comment. That's really kind of you. People are asking about signed copies of this book. They will be available in the Etsy store. They're currently not because I won't put them up until I have a pile that I can hand Josh to sign, because otherwise it will take 2 weeks to get them to you, and that's not amazing. Alpha Centurion wants you to sign Gur's copy, Who's Gurn Mania. Why not? That sounds like fun. Trigger
Can you
warning asks.
can you
Oh,
even philosophy, bruh? All
we just
right.
need a shirt. Do you philosophy?
But you have to write it with 2 F's. That's the key, right?
That's
That's
true.
how you do it.
That's true. Trigger warning asks if you have any interest in evaluating the Talmud.
Yeah, I mean, like the Talmud is phenomenally interesting. The problem is it's very late for me. Um, and there are people that obviously do it far, far better. Uh, far, far better than I. Now, I do some analysis of rabbinic texts for the slavery in very specific cases where I think it's applicable to its original context. But the beautiful thing about Talmudic writings is they're really thinking, right? And this is something that I just want to broadly encourage anybody that's using ancient sources. That sounds like a truism, right? Um, like think when you, but like really grapple with these texts because that's where I think a lot of things begin to shine. Don't just, I don't know, slavishly try to apply an ancient text. I don't think that's a smart move. And that's, I think, one thing that we can learn from Talmudic writings and from just the Jewish tradition as it's moved forward in time is just trying to wrestle with how to apply ancient texts in modern contexts. And yeah, so yes, obviously the Talmud I think is incredibly important, um, just for different reasons.
And Mikhail is asking a question that I think, if we don't have any others, is a great place to end. Ultimately, does the Bible endorse slavery?
So, a question that I have to nuance, uh, unfortunately, it depends on what you mean by a Bible. And because I think behind that is an interpretive framework that's going to have to be implied or applied. So, yeah, that's just going to depend. The argument that I make in the book is that when you consider certain theological arguments that are common to Christian apologetics, they're problematic, that try to encompass the entirety of the biblical text, the 66 books of their canon, that those arguments are problematic from an internal critique standpoint. But the other thing is the word endorse there in the present tense, like it endorses currently. That's another thing that I think is problematic and isn't dependent upon your interpretive framework. So the reason that I chose the title, did the Old Testament endorse past tense slavery? The reason I chose Old Testament instead of Hebrew Bible, even though I use Hebrew Bible interchangeably in the book, is that I'm trying to generally come at this from a fundamentalist evangelical or more evangelical standpoint, because that's usually where the Christian apologetics are coming from. But then endorsed is past tense, like we're dealing with the period, in the first millennium BCE. So yes, is the answer. I'm sorry, with all that nuancing and caveats. Yes,
you should have said, if you want an answer, you have to buy this ginormous book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And read
if
it.
You want an answer?
No, because
you
I
have
think
to buy this ginormous.
That's
book.
a lot of reading to get a simple yes. Yes. So, thank you very much. We are going to finish up. Thank you, everybody, for watching and for listening and for your questions. They were very interesting and enjoyable. Thank you also for people who helped to handle the somewhat bizarre Christian apologists who came into the chat. I appreciate you all very much. Josh, yes, go for it.
And I want to thank Vishanti specifically in the chat for reading through the book and providing some very valuable insights. Really appreciate it. This is very good.
Oh, Vishanti. Okay. Apparently Vishanti sent a Hovind super chat that I have missed.
Oh.
I did miss. I'm so sorry. There we go.
So here's the problem. Vishanti, is it? Yeah. Okay. So here's what I think is very problematic about your understanding of the text. Okay, is it doesn't take into account the water that comes down to the otters. Okay, and of course we know evolution is false. It's the dumbest religion that's ever been foisted upon the American taxpayer. Okay, so what I would say about this is when we think about the creation of the universe and the the dome overhead, the Bible is very clear on this. Okay, I'm here to help.
And with that wisdom from not Kent Hovind, we will say goodnight. Thank you all so much, Josh. Thank you for sharing your amazing information and knowledge and time, and for writing this massive book that would, I think, stun a small child if I threw it hard enough. I'm not, by the way, advocating throwing books at small children or indeed anyone. It's just,
we should
it's
have ended
heavy.
30 seconds ago. No, just kidding.
I'm going to get CPS at the door. We're going to just end it there because I'm clearly far too tired to be live. But thank you all so much. We will be back. I don't know when, but we will be back. Have a lovely weekend.
Bye, guys.
Digital Hammurabi is made possible by generous sponsorship from our patrons. Their support means that we have the technological and academic resources necessary to bring the ancient world directly to you. If you want to join the team, go to patreon.com/Digital Hammurabi to see how you can help.